You had a slide showing policy alternatives, and you had improving food banks on the top and alleviating poverty on the bottom. I wasn't sure if you saw them as alternative policies or working together. I know you presented that people presented first at 2 o'clock the first scenario, the food banks improving it on the second scenario, alleviating poverty. But certainly for the short and middle term, are there not people presenting both of those things as being essential and integrating them into first, we need to continue the poverty banks to alleviate poverty, and we'll see after we alleviate poverty, depending on how that works, who's left in the food banks.
So, very good question, as if I planted it. So I actually, so I've got two ways of responding it. So one is I do think one completely undermines the other. I do not think they work together. I think the Build a Better Food Bank movement is the absolute reason that we do not have structural reform on the basic income guarantee to all low-income Canadians and other types of, real structural ways of getting rid of this problem. So there are, so they do not work together. And so the second answer, though, is that I have done a study of policy entrepreneurs. We have a roster of policy actors in food insecurity. I mean, they had to sign consent forms, but there are 93 of them, and they just snowball sampled whatever. And we asked them to name policy entrepreneurs in food insecurity. And is anyone here in my roster? Oh, don't tell me you're confidential. Sorry, but so I have this roster, and so we asked them to nominate 3 policy entrepreneurs who explaining that they could be influencing food insecurity policy. And so we have 2 major camps: a small but well-known income group, and then we have this large group of leaders in the community food system, food bank, food secure Canada type group, right? And then we have 2 what we call the grays, so red and blue and gray. These are what we call bridgers, so they're balanced in their approach. So they'll say hard-nosed things around income, they say hard-nosed things around doing things today. And so the theory would be that this group of bridgers, and so one of them actually is something, that actually, has a very broad sort of advocacy frame, including programming, but also some hard-edged, interventions at the highest level. They should be the ability to bridge. And so in one way we should actually work with these bridge opportunities to say, could we actually align our frames? Could we work together better instead of undermining? But we'd have to convince an entire population of followers that, that there's something tainted about their good work, right? In the food secure movement, the community food movement. The other thing about frame shifting is that since I was a very harsh critic of children's feeding programs when they were introduced, suggesting that breakfast skipping was not a phenomenon in low-income families, that breakfast is not expensive to feed a kid, that when you say a kid is going to school hungry, you're saying they've got a neglectful parent. Oh, no, we didn't mean that, right? So then you become more universal, you've got Kiwi, you've got like special cultural exchanges, whatever. So the whole thing shifts as an analysis. And the community food system has actually shifted a lot from, because they're not really taking care of food insecurity, but now they're working on organics, and they're working on local agriculture. And so you don't even have to worry about food insecurity to have a lot of justification. So that's another big tension. Is say, how are we supposed to tell that group that have shifted way over? And sometimes they still have it in the name of food insecurity, but mostly they're just having it in the terms of everyone has the right to food, we need to support our farmers, our prices are too high, etc. So my final thing is that when even the ones that are more balanced try to raise money, the donate now button is where the hunger is placed on their website. They're still raising money in the name of the poor, which is disingenuous, is the nicest thing I can say. And so we have to call them on it. Don't raise money in the name of the poor if that's your number one way of raising money, and then everything else you do is not. So it's a very good question. I don't have a full answer, but I am very concerned around, again, public health loves partnership. Everybody can be a partner, whatever. And sometimes, you know what, I think it's over. I think I've had it, you know, in terms of whether or not this alliance can continue as the frame shifts go on. And many people that started are well past the food insecure thing, and they are full into community agriculture and other food policy and all that stuff, right? And they got their start in the food insecure movement. And nobody figured that one out, that they're not doing food insecurity anymore. So it's a long answer.
Hi, Linda. My name's Diana Bronson. I'm the director of Food Security Canada.
Yeah.
So we're, I guess, some of the key groups that you're criticizing in your talk, and I find that unfortunate because I agree with a great deal of what you have to say. But I do find it very, very black and white. What we do at Food Secure Canada and groups and organizations and individuals that we bring together is try and make the links between sustainable agriculture, health, and income insecurity. That's what we do. And I happen to think that's a very important mission. And I also think that the Scooter was absolutely right to underline those issues. That they all are part of the right to food, which was not defined at the World Food Summit, but is defined in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and which the Government of Canada continues to have to report on as a legal obligation, and does so terribly badly, and has ceased consulting any civil society organizations at all on the reports it does. So that those groups, like Adididwai and many other groups, human rights groups, have been working on this for years, no longer have a hearing. And Canada has become the laughing stock of the human rights community, as it has become the laughing stock of the climate change community. And those things are related. Climate change and food and agriculture and global poverty are related. And I just find it a bit black and white to condemn us all. You know, Food Secure Canada, for example, is not a charitable organization. We do not have charitable status. And we do not shut up about income levels and minimum wage and poverty as the causes of food security. So I find it a little bit lacking in nuance. Maybe I'm feeling a bit defensive.
We have noticed.
And I use proofs research all the time. All the time. And I'm in regular communication with Val Harrisack and her team. And we are not denying that these are the issues. And I don't think anybody is saying that a community food center or a breakfast program is the solution to these issues. But I do think people are using food and public interest and mobilization around food to have a public debate that is healthy and that can call all of our governments to account on the right to food, which should be the frame that we're all using.
So I can only briefly reply, and I think it's thank you for coming, Diane, and thanks for your presentation. I would say just a couple of things. So all my work in Bangladesh and other countries is on MDG 1, that we will reduce by 2015 the number of people that are hungry and that are living on less than $1 a day. That's where the right to food is first to be addressed. And I think if we expand to every other conceptualization of the right to food without addressing MDG 1, the fundamental abrogation of individuals' rights to live securely in terms of having enough food, then we are completely departing from what's really at the core of the human rights.
Long before MDGs.
But I'm saying that we've got to address MDG 1, and when we start that everything's a human right, very aspirational, and we let MDG 1 linger, not being addressed, I think we violated the fundamental rights. The second thing is that policy framing wants to put a very clear boundary around rhetoric, right, which is what the policy discourse is about. When we have policy blending, which is what what we would call this and this and this and this and this are all part of the policy analysis, policy blending, then we end up creating a lack of clarity, a lack of absolute understanding what the link is to solution, and we end up being able to have a dilution of the effect because it's complicated. It's everything. Everyone's responsible. So it's a framing technique that you may call it black or white, we just call it bounded. And we would suggest that the lack of traction, the fact that I didn't show all the data, we have no reduction in food insecurity in Canada despite a number of experimental efforts over decades, especially since we've had measurement. There is no movement in this regard. The only thing that changes things up and down are these big recessions. So it's not working. For one, that makes it an intractable policy problem. And the second thing is that you can see if you give the politicians or the policy influencers 17 reasons why this is all important, then it's very easy to ignore what we would consider to be one of the more fundamental ones. And then you see many, many other things. So that's the issue of policy blending, why policy blending doesn't create policy traction, it does create this sort of policy inertia. And that was what we were trying to show yesterday and then today. But it's very difficult in this environment to get a win-win where we have a clear definition of the problem and we understand clearly an acceptable policy solution, right? And so when we're having very difficult times, it's very easy then to have multiple policy actors suggesting different things and people can select what they like. So.
But if I may, just one point on that. I don't think the lack of action on poverty is because the problem is not clear. It's because there's no political will. It's because neoliberalism. It's because the disengagement of the state overall. It's not because they don't get it.
No. You want to answer that, or?
So, I mean, I absolutely agree. The frame of awareness raising, like Hunger Awareness Day and all that stuff, I mean, there is no, I mean, that's a very, very problematic frame to raise awareness because it doesn't mean anything, right? It doesn't have any action associated with it. But I would also contest that if we talk about poverty, we have very many different constructions of what that means. And we have very many different constructions of what the policy solution would be. So political will is way down in that policy actor, the window thing. So when we have deserving and undeserving poor, we have les aînés, we have chômage, we have the homeless. We have created a discourse that makes poverty quite complicated. So we've, and make it quite invisible, and we have programs, etc. So I actually don't think that our discourse on poverty has made everyone aware. I think we've got to be able to slice it in such fine ways, and we all perpetuate that in terms of our marginalized group, our newcomers, our group. So we have actually done a lot of, one of the other ways of framing is to do this stratification. So you do a stratification of the poor, and so they're the newcomer poor, they're the immigrant poor, they're the monoparental. So you start stratifying. No wonder you're sending a frame out about a great deal of confusion, right? So that's the other sort of issue around the poverty frame, is that it has no traction because it is one of full stratification.
Je vais prendre une dernière question.